Welcome back to Worst Seats in the House. Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta. April 7th is our next live show. That's at Tuttle's at 7 p.m. Can't wait for that. That'll be right when we get back from that next road trip to New Jersey, the Rangers and the Islanders. And big news today, Anthony, is we're down at Tria Rink before the Wild have their optional morning skate before taking on the Washington Capitals. And Alex Ovechkin tonight is, as John Hines has been indicating, and as we've been speculating on the podcast for the last 3 weeks since the trade deadline, that we'd eventually see Kaprizov on the ice around this time. And we walk into Tria Rink, and there Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek are skating with Andy Ness. Very good signs.
Great sign. And we've always talked about this, that far from a medical expert, but they sure look like they're not too far away.
Yeah,
the way that they're skating on the ice.
I will say, I don't know what Kaprizov is feeling, but there have been a couple times watching him today that you could just tell that he's still not 100%. Like he's coming back from a serious surgery, and there have been times, but every time he seems to grimace or grab for his side, there he is out there doing the next drill with Andy Ness and Eriksson Ek and Connor Beaupre in net, and I don't want to speculate, but they don't look like they're on the ice for the first time today, Anthony. Like usually when you come back from long injuries, it's you take a twirl and you don't have pucks and sticks in your hands, but Andy's running them through drills, which makes you wonder if they have been on the ice longer than the Wild have been saying, and if their returns could be sooner than the Wild have been indicating.
Well, and it always depends on what the injury is, because sometimes if it's guys that have had a lower body injury, they've been able to continue to do things with their hands, like hallway ball and puck drills and those kind of things. And if it's an upper body injury, maybe they've been able to do more to stay in shape. So it always depends on what you're returning from. And we've always commented on Jonas Brodin coming back and looking like he's in mid-season form after about 4 strides back and forth down the ice. Who knows what the exact timing is, but with either one of those guys, nothing would surprise you.
Right.
They're both guys that no matter what the injury has ever been, they've been back faster than expected. And that's why this Kirill Kaprizov one was so surprising when we were hit with the news when we got back from the Four Nations break, that the speculation originally had been that probably a couple weeks after that break, he'd be back. And I remember during that break thinking it wouldn't shock me if he was out on the ice with the team in that right away when they got back, and maybe not playing right away, but in that return to play mode. So it really surprised me that it's been this long with him. And we'll probably find out more details during the offseason with exactly what the process was and what the setbacks were. But it wouldn't shock me if at some point on this road trip we saw these two teams jump in and join the team.
With Kirill, this is the way, from my reporting, this is what I could safely say, is that when he originally started complaining about this in early to mid-December, he was playing. He finally came out of the Christmas break for whatever reason and couldn't play anymore. The Wild, he saw a bunch of different experts. He went out to Vail. He went out to St. Louis, Philadelphia, other places, I believe, to go check this out. And they all together came up with, let's try to rehab this naturally, because a lot of guys are able to play through this until the end of the season. They decided, all right, he's been skating for 3 weeks. Kirill, let's play 2 or 3 games, see how it feels. And then Kirill, after that Chicago game, decided that he couldn't go out any further. When Bill Guerin said minimum 4 weeks, I do not believe that he was telling a fib there. I think he thought that the timetable for this type of surgery, with a lot of the doctors they've used in the past, were 4 weeks. The doctor that essentially, and remember, a part of this was the Jack Eichel stuff, that happened 4 or 5 years ago, where the NHLPA and the NHL basically came up with a mechanism that allows players to control their own health. And I think that Kirill found his own doctor in New York, and he had the surgery there. And I think that the timeline given by this doctor was just more conservative than really other players that have had this type of surgery on the Wild have had before. And so when Bill said minimum 4 weeks, I think that's what he was truly believing and was told just based on what guys have had on this team prior. And this one,
well, technically he was right. It was a minimum of 4 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I know that it becomes frustrating. I know that people think that the Wild a lot of times, and look, I get it from a transparency point, are not forthcoming with a lot of their injuries, but this one was one where this was a doctor's timeline, and they were following it to the T, and we'll see here. Like, they look like they could play now. Obviously, we don't know what they're feeling. We don't know what the timeline is. I can't imagine that John Hines today is just going to spell out he's coming back this date. So we'll see. I mean, they have no practices on this upcoming road trip to New York. So if they're not close to returning, which right now, if we are to believe that this is their first time on the ice, they're probably not. You do wonder if they just come back after the road trip when we're back, and stay back here with Andy Ness and really work while the Wild are on the road. This is based on the fact the Wild right now on the schedule essentially have 2 practices the rest of the season. 2. That's beyond belief.
I don't know how different it is from other teams, but the Wild have certainly been prioritizing rest down the stretch. And I think part of that is the health, and part of it is the guys they're missing. So there's been a huge workload for some of the other guys that they've been trying to make sure take your optionals, guys like Boldy, Faber, Hartman even, that have been playing career high paces and minutes. And I think you have to, with the way the schedule has gone and the way that the Wild travel days and things like that you've just needed rest more than you've needed time on the ice. Right. And I still think that's probably the case the rest of the way. When you look at the way the schedule lays out, I mean, you've got the trip we've been talking about to the East Coast where it's an every other day thing. And, I'm sure they'll get on the ice one of those off days, at least in an optional fashion, perhaps. But you come back home and you've got 2 different spots where you have 2 off days between games. And other than those 2 to get a practice in, at this point in the season, I think fresh legs are more important than a couple X's and O's of something on the ice.
Right. And by the way, like, if Zeev Buium, same sort of situation, if Zeev Buium loses this weekend and the Wild sign him soon after his DU season ends, the Wild again have 2 practices the rest of the way. So even if he just shows up in New York, I still think that he's going to, need a bunch of skates and morning skates to get up to thing. And as we're about to talk about, the Wild finally find themselves suddenly in an absolute meat grinder, and not just retain playoff positioning, being in the 7th hole right now, but make the playoffs. And I don't think that they're just going to throw a DU player into the lineup right away without practices, unless the Wild are suddenly inundated with injuries, which in this season, who knows what could happen now in Declan Chisholm's day-to-day. I think we're going to find out today that Marcus Foligno is playing tonight against the Capitals. That'll be a much-needed boost of energy and physicality. And, Anthony, I wanted to ask you about that before we start talking about the team. Is like, that has been one of, even during that 3-game win streak, the one thing that has concerned me about what I've been watching on the ice lately is the lack of physicality. Like, even on those plays where they're defending 6-on-5s and have scored the empty net goals, it's alarming how they don't lay a body or check guys right now. And I think Foligno adding that energy will help, but that is not going to work in the playoffs. Like, they've got to get more physical.
Well, I think they do, but I think there's a little bit of a misnomer. Like, you can play strong without delivering a bunch of hits. And there's different ways to be aggressive and to be physical other than maybe the highlight reel type hit that you're talking about. But they don't really have the guys that are cut out for that. And I do think the last couple of games, their 4th line has started to show a little bit of an identity, and now that 4th line will change when you start to add bodies back. In fact, even just adding Foligno probably shoves Trenyon back to the 4th line, and now all of a sudden you have a 4th line that might have Trenyon and Brazeau on it, and you got guys that Brazeau's not exactly a guy that's going to deliver big hits, but he is a physical player. He's hard to move off the puck. He's been hard to move from around the net, and maybe you start to get a couple lines then that develop that. But when you look at the other personnel with the lineup they've been playing, I mean, Eriksson Ek's absence means that they're not as physical down the middle. And Ryan Hartman can be a pest, but he's not the size and strength of an Eriksson Ek. Yep. Now throw him back in, and now another line becomes a little more physical. So
who's the least physical 6'6" forward I've ever seen in my career? Is Justin Brazeau. Like, it is unreal how he can't even bump guys off pucks right now.
Yeah, but he's, like I was saying, he's a little bit different kind of a a strong or physical player, where I've also, he hasn't been as easy to knock off pucks lately. I mean, his game's been better. I get it that, everybody's looking at it and saying like he's done nothing since he's been here. And it started slowly for sure. And it's not like he's made a major impact, but at least the last couple of games, we've started to see some flashes of how this guy had scored 10 goals earlier this season. He's had a few chances. That fourth line has had a few chances. And I think if you get the guys back and you start to push guys down in the lineup where they're supposed to be or where they fit better, we'll probably see a fourth line that can give you an effective 8-9 minutes a night, which hasn't been the case every night down the stretch.
Right. Still don't get the trade, though. I still don't. Not that, again, we are well chronicled on what we think of Murat Huzdinov. And it's, by the way,
you're talking about a team becoming more physical. He's certainly not putting him in the lineup instead of Brazeau doesn't make the team more physical.
But they have slowed down dramatically too, and at least he brings speed with Lauko. Like, I would rather Lauko in the playoffs. Like, use him, and if you don't retain him, then you don't retain him. But
possibly. But remember, the team gets faster too when you bring these guys back.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden, again, every time you look at the lineup, and we talked about this, I think 2 shows ago maybe, where there was a night where the Wild were without Johansson, Foligno, Eriksson Ek, and Kaprizov, and then lost Rossi in the middle of the game.
Right. No brain.
That's 5 of, if you had at the beginning of the season said, here are our top 9 forwards, that was 5 of them that were out that night. And yet the lineup wasn't embarrassing. And you start to say, okay, now throw 5 guys back in. Think of how that affects a lineup. Put 5 guys back in and start to, okay, this guy fits on the top line. That means somebody from the top line goes to the second. Somebody from the second goes to the third. Well, you're impacting the entire lineup. And I think everybody gets faster when you start to put those guys back in, because not only are they faster, but they also so much more effectively move the puck. That just makes the whole team look faster.
Take so much pressure off Matt Boldy and Marco Rossi, and just from a pressure standpoint.
I've been asked a lot about Matt Boldy's year lately, and when you really look at it, I don't think he's had quite the year I thought he was going to have. I thought he was going to be an 80-point player. He's probably going to be 70.
But his goals after 20 game, he was on a 46-goal pace. He's on a 26-goal pace.
Yeah,
now.
I agree with you that his year has been a little disappointing, but that's what I was going to say, is that I've been asked a lot about him lately, and I just think, all right, but let's just think about it in this way. He's probably going to end up at 70 points. I thought he'd be 80. I thought maybe it would be a 35 and 45. It's probably going to be more like a 30 and 40. Mm-hmm. He's had to play without Kirill Kaprizov for half a season, without Eriksson Ek for almost half a season. Eriksson Ek was supposed to be his centerman. First of all, think about the power play. That's 2/5 of your top power play are gone. If they're all together all season, how many extra points is that on the power play alone? Mm-hmm. Probably 5, 7, 8, maybe. Then you start to think about on a nightly basis, where right now, he and Marco Rossi are facing the other team's best all night, every night. Put Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek back in the lineup, but at least half the time, those guys are getting the toughest matchup. They're getting the shutdown line. They're getting the top D pair, and you're getting at least a few shifts a night against a third pair, against maybe a second or third defensive type line. That's worth a few more points too. So I'm not trying to apologize for Matt Boldy not scoring as much as I thought he would, and I'm sure the team thought he would, as fans hoped he would. I just think there's some factors there that you
totally
have to
agree
consider.
With you, but he's got to be better, and he's like, I just don't like the mentality that he, when you he's paid $7 million for a reason. And the goal, remember, coming into this year, like Bill Guerin said, he had 50 and 50 potential. I thought 40 and 40. He was certainly on a 40 and 40 pace. And you're 100% right that everything affects him right now. But I just think you'd love to see him step up, and he has not done that. And the other thing that really bothers me about his game is and it never stops. Like, you and I have talked about always double standards, like when Kevin Fiala used to throw pucks away and would get in trouble, and other guys would do the same thing and wouldn't. And I remember you always talking to Dean Evison about why are you always getting on him but not him? Like Matt Boldy. And I hope John Hines is talking to him behind the scenes, because every time I bring it up, John looks at me like I'm from outer space. But his puck management has been for the birds for like 2 months now. He just throws pucks away left and right. Like, power plays die on his stick. Anthony, and I just don't understand it. Like, and how many empty net goals against this year have started with him turning the puck over, like the other night? Like, you just wish that he would hold on to that puck a little longer and play with the puck a little more rather than always trying to immediately get rid of it.
Yeah, and I actually, on the power play, I see it the other way. I think Matt Zuccarello's a guy that hangs onto the puck, and with him, you give him a pass because he sees things that nobody else sees.
But I think he hangs on the puck because he
sometimes
tries to draw defenders to him to make plays for others.
And I think Boldy is the guy, like, let Zuccarello do that. Let Zuccarello hang onto the puck, and the rest of you just keep it moving, because when it goes to Boldy and it stops, that's, I think, where turnovers follow, is because all of a sudden the puck movement slows down, he hangs onto the puck, and now he's trying to make a play under some pressure rather than just keep it simple. But I also keep going back to, look who's on that top power play that wouldn't be there if you had a healthy lineup. And now all of a sudden, let Zuccarello and Kaprizov move the puck around a little bit. Well, Matt Boldy's going to have a lot more time and space than he has right now if Kirill Kaprizov's a part of that power play. If Russo and Eriksson Ek is the net front guy instead of Vinny Hinostroza. I mean, there's just a difference. And that difference probably affects Matt Boldy more than anybody else on the team. Zuccarello is going to be Zuccarello. He'd have more points if he was passing to some of these other guys, but his game is the same. Boldy's game becomes a lot more dangerous if, I mean, really, he probably becomes a secondary and maybe a third option on that power play a lot of times if Eriksson Ek's your net front guy and Kaprizov's also on the ice.
Right. That line the other night had to be broken up. We'll see if they're back together tonight against Washington, but the other night, not very good, especially defensively.
No, they're not.
No
but
shots.
The only thing I want to add about Boldy, too, is that what has been constant all year is he still continues to pile up opportunities and shots. I mean, he's in the top 6 in the league in shots. I think he was second early in the year before Kaprizov got hurt. He's still in the top 6. And I know that it always feels like, well, how does Boldy end a game with 2 shots on goal? Well, he also has a lot of nights where he has 7. And like in Dallas the other night, he ended up with 7 shots on goal. And that's what those kind of things usually even out over the course of the year. But he's been about a 12.5% shooting guy throughout his career. This year he's at 9. Well, that's the difference with 250 shots. There's your difference of a guy that's got 26 goals instead of 34.
Watching the morning skate here today with Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek out there against Connor Beaupre. Maybe that's what they need to do, is have Connor come and practice a little more with Boldy and get that shooting percentage up. Just kidding, Connor. By the way, last night we did the sports report show at Parlay. Real fun time with Mark Rosen and John Krasinski, Lavelle E. Neal III, and Jim Suhan. And our buddy Ken that comes on all our Europe trips was there, and he was telling me how much we're going to love Spanish wine this year.
Well, I can't wait. Did he have his briefcase of very important papers?
He did. He had everything there. He's going to Paris tomorrow.
Is he coming on the trip?
Yeah, he's on our trip.
Oh, nice.
But he was telling me how much we're going to absolutely love Spanish wine. And he asked me if I've been drinking, and I know. I'm like, no, but Anthony has. And, you're prepping for our big trip this summer.
I am. I'm polishing up on my Spanish, which I practiced in Costa Rica on our trip, but I'm looking forward to it this summer. Yeah, we've had, and Albarino has been a Spanish wine that we've been drinking quite a bit over the last few years, and there was a Portuguese comparable with Albarino, same grape. But we've been into some of the Tempranillos, and I really like it. I'm excited about it, and so come along on the trip because we'll have experts that know a lot more than I do, but we have a lot of fun talking about the food and wine on these trips, and we mix in some hockey and baseball conversation, a few stories along the way too. But I know we're down to the last few days and only have a couple spots left. So
you have until I think April 1st to sign up. So if you want to come with us, go to definedestinations.com. You can get all the contact information for Michael Kenny,
and you'll get treated to some great stories like our friend Ken, who's carries around a briefcase of very important papers at all times, just in case a meeting were to pop up anywhere. He's ready. So
I was talking to Ken at the bar, and all we were doing, this kid Jack that comes to all our shows was right next to him, listening to this, and it was 2 travel geeks talking about frequent flyer miles and Delta One and all the tricks of the trade to get upgraded for like 5 minutes before the show with Jack just listening at these two old commercials. We're talking about, like, he's like, I'm like a month away from 3 million miles. I'm like, I'm at 2.2 million miles. I mean, it was typical Ken and me talking about our favorite subject, which was travel.
I just booked a flight using miles, so I'm pretty excited about that.
Where'd you go? Where are you going?
Well, we're going to go to Denver for an engagement party for AJ at the end of May.
I hate people. I think it's the dumbest thing in the world to waste miles on a domestic flight that short.
Well, I don't have very many miles, so it was, why not? What am I going to save them for?
You build them up for something fun. Like,
this is going to be fun.
I know, but it also was probably a $200 flight. Like, you're just wasting miles.
It was It was a $320 flight, and it cost me 20,000 miles.
I don't know. Save the 20,000, build it up, go to Hawaii. That's how you do it.
Yeah. See, it would take me 7 years to get to Hawaii.
Yeah. You don't get, even though you fly Delta charters, you don't get Delta miles.
I don't.
That.
And I'll be sitting in row 46 on this flight to Spain.
Yeah. Let's take a quick break. But when we come back, I do want to talk to you about just the state of the team right now, their positioning in the standings, because it's getting a little hairy. We'll be right back on Worst Seats in the House. Have you ever driven past a piece of land and wondered who owns that? Or maybe you need to know exactly where a property line runs? That's where Onyx Hunt comes in, and it's not just for hunters. There are folks using Onyx for their jobs every day throughout the country. From farmers and ranchers mapping out their fields, wildland firefighters navigating rough terrain, to construction workers needing to know who owns what property, this app offers something for everyone. If you need the best land ownership maps, aerial imagery, and property boundaries in your pocket, Onyx Hunt is the tool for the job. Try it for free for 7 days. Download Onyx Hunt in the app or Google Play Store, or visit onyxmaps.com/hunt to get started.
There are many reasons to open a smart checking account at Royal Credit Union, including no monthly fees, no minimum balance, and a $250 bonus. Getting your $250 is easy. Open your account by May 31st, receive 2 payroll direct deposits of $200 or more, and you'll get a $250 bonus. See details and open your account today at rcu.org/checking bonus. No minimum balance required to obtain bonus. Offer ends 5/31/25. Insured by NCUA.
Hey, have you been dreaming of a lake cabin lifestyle with boating, fishing, and family fun in northern Minnesota? Well, lately I've thought a lot about how cool it would be to have a getaway like so many Minnesotans. And if you're like me, you probably think that owning your own lakeside getaway is beyond your budget. Well, if you think lake cabin real estate prices keep going up, well, think again. This is Russo, and I'm here to tell you there is an affordable way to enjoy a cabin lifestyle and all that goes with it. And yes, I said affordable. I founded a Clamshell Beach Resort, which is located on the Whitefish chain of 14 lakes for you and your family to enjoy. Here's how. Clamshell has lake homes that offer deeded fractional ownership, and the keywords there are deeded and fractional. You own it. Imagine having 5 weeks a year to enjoy Clamshell with its beaches, pool, and lodge that's full of kids' activities. Is golf your game? There's a great golf course right across the road. Like winter sports? Well, you can go ice fishing, cross-country skiing, or snowmobiling right out the door at Clamshell. And there's no maintenance, no grass mowing, no snow removal. It's done all for you. And you can own a share of Clamshell Beach Resort at an affordable price. To learn more about ownership opportunities at Clamshell Beach Resort, go to cottagesonwhitefish.com or contact Pat Egan at 612-220-9819. That's cottagesonwhitefish.com. Back here, Worst Seats in the House. Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta, coming to you from Tria Rink. Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek are still out there with Andy Ness before the morning skate.
Although I hear the Zamboni, so they better get off quickly.
Yeah, they better get off.
Can you imagine one of those? Well, Kaprizov was getting close, but then got hit by a Zamboni while working on his tips in front of the net.
Yeah, that would be tragic. That might affect the everybody's like anything that happens with Kaprizov. How will this affect contract negotiations? If he's hit with a Zamboni, probably affects
that could affect it.
All right, so I do want to talk to you about April 7th again is our next live show. That's at Tuttle's at 7 p.m. We'll have 2 shows in April, depending on the playoff schedule. We hope that we'll be covering. That will determine when our next live show is. And let's talk about that, Anthony. It's gotten hairy. And I know last week, in your typical, Anthony LaPanta lecturing, kind of condescending tone, a little patronizing.
Not condescending.
You went on this rant about how the people that think that they're going to miss the playoffs and Calgary and Vancouver lose as much as they win, I think was definitely a line of yours. And ever since, guys like freaking Derek Forbert are scoring for the Vancouver Canucks.
Okay.
They keep winning. Calgary keeps
they keep winning, except
they are now the Wild have a 5-point cushion on the playoffs. 10 games left. All these teams are going north. The Wild keep going south. And we're not even talking about the St. Louis Blues, who have won 7 in a row and are right on their heels.
The Vancouver Canucks in their last 10 games have won 5 and lost 5.
But those are...
I'm just saying. They lose as often as they win. They've won 5 and lost 5. They're 5-4-1.
God, I hate when you use facts like that.
Right, yeah, those damn facts. And so, look, it's gotten tight, but we knew going into this stretch for the Wild, this 5-game stretch against 5 playoff teams, starting with Dallas and Vegas back-to-back, then Washington, then New Jersey twice. You knew that the race was likely going to tighten up during that stretch, because that's why those wins at the end of the homestand were so important for Minnesota. To get the wins against LA, Seattle, Buffalo, they needed those 3 to maintain a cushion during this stretch, because this was going to be a stretch where even a healthy Wild team playing well could lose 3 out of these 5 games. And they've lost the first 2 to Dallas and Vegas. So you knew it was going to tighten up a little bit. And I'm not saying it's a done deal that the Wild are in the playoffs, but I think they're going to make it. And when you look at, let's even do this. Right now they've got 10 games left. So we'll look at the last 10 for these teams. All right. Just because right now we're talking about it as if over the last 10, everything's gone to hell and the leads evaporated. These teams are sprinting past them. If everybody did in the next 10 what they did in the last 10, Wild 4-5-1, so they end up with 94 points. They'd get passed by St. Louis, who would have 17 points because they're 8-1-1 in their last 10. Now, they only have 9 games left, but let's even just give them the benefit of the doubt. They continue this amazing pace. They pass the Wild. But the Wild end up at 94. Vancouver at 5-4-1, that's 11 more points. They'd end up at 91, 3 points short of the Wild. Calgary, 6-2-2 over their last 10, that's 14 points. They get to 93, short of the Wild. So even if everybody plays the same way they've played over the last 10, Minnesota still finishes in front of both Vancouver and Calgary. And I think Minnesota's next 10 will be better than the last 10, if for no other reason than the schedule lightens up a little bit for them. But the Wild have to get healthy. They have to win games. If you look, what is it realistically going to take? Minnesota wins tiebreakers over these teams, by the way, because regulation wins is the first tiebreaker. They're 6 ahead of both Vancouver and Calgary. They're not going to, those teams aren't going to make up 6 regulation wins in 10. They're ahead of both of them in regulation and overtime wins. So Vancouver has to get 6 more points than Minnesota in their last 10. Well, if Minnesota gets 10 points, let's say they go 5-5 or they go 4-4-2 or something like that and get 10 points. Think of what you have to do to gain 6 on that. That means Vancouver's got to go 8-2 to catch them. And
what do you think happens, though, 7th or 8th, if they're going to make the playoffs? Because if they go to Winnipeg, Anthony, I'm going to freaking implode. I mean, come on. This is the worst joke ever. This. You know what this reminds me of? When the Wild had a chance to go to Anaheim, and instead something happened the last day of the regular season, and we wound up in St. Louis. And we had a chance to go to Vegas. It was just going to be beautiful. We were going to, hang out in the sun.
I think it would be hard not
beautiful meals, and now we might wind up in Winnipeg.
It would be hard not to think St. Louis is going to pass them. But remember this about St. Louis, and I'm not diminishing what they've done because they've been the best team in the NHL. I think it's over the last 16 games. They're 14-2-2. 18 games, that'd be 14-2-2.
4.06 goals a game, 2.18 goals against.
But when we looked at that coming out of the break, they had the easiest schedule in the NHL,
100%.
And they've gone through most of the easiest stretch. They have a stretch coming up where over
Colorado twice.
They've got Colorado twice, Winnipeg and Edmonton on the road.
Yeah. Edmonton, by the way, stinks right now.
But all in a 6-game span. At least it's 4 out of 6 playoff teams, and 3 of those 4 games on the road. So their schedule does get a little more rigid, but I look, they have to start getting points in these games, and the way they've been playing, we've complimented them so often that they've embraced this style where you have to play a game where 2 goals is enough to get you a point, and it would have been against Dallas but they didn't get the 2 goals, and they wound up giving up an empty netter to lose 3-0. It would have been against Vegas. They were down 2-1 with 5 minutes to go in the game. 2 goals would have gotten them a point. They didn't get to 2. So somehow they got to find a way that, yes, you can play the game the right way, but if you don't score twice, there aren't points to be had. Somehow They got to find a way to push through this.
And the reality is, as much as I joke about where I want to go for the playoffs, if we're fortunate to be able to cover the playoffs, the Wild don't win against any of these teams when they're healthy. I mean, the Wild have lost 11 out of 13 against Vegas. They're winless in 8 against Winnipeg. We know that what their history is against Dallas. So either way, they're going in underdog.
They're going in as an underdog. Yeah. But you know what? The thing that where I think the Wild have hurt themselves more, now it might be a little different because they just lost to Dallas and Vegas, but we showed the numbers going into the Dallas game. Into that game, the Wild had the 5th best record in the league against current playoff teams. And there's only 6 teams that had a better than 500 win percentage in those games, and the Wild were one of them. They were 5th best. Now, with these 2 losses, they've probably slipped a little bit in that area. But I think what's hurt them more have been the losses to the non-playoff teams lately, where now St. Louis was a non-playoff team when they beat the Wild last week, but they've got to do a better job of making sure they get points in those games. So if you look ahead, you got to get points in New York against the Rangers and the Islanders. You've got to get the points against San Jose, against Anaheim. And if you do that in and of itself, that's 4 wins there. Get a win in Calgary or Vancouver on that trip, you're at your 10 points. And I believe if the Wild end up with 10 points the rest of the way, 95, that's enough to make the playoffs.
They definitely have a winnable road trip coming up, but 3 desperate teams as well. Jersey has not been playing well without Jack Hughes. Rangers, as we know, just are absolutely beyond belief. They bleed chances and they don't score, and they are struggling big time. And then the Wild go to the Islanders, who at that point are going to be very, very desperate. Then they come back for a final homestand before going on the road to Calgary and Vancouver, which at this point will be huge games for probably all 3 of those teams, and then they come home back for the season finale against Anaheim, which we assume Marc-Andre Fleury is going to get. I feel bad for Flower right now. They'd love to play him more, but you got to go with your best guy. Gus has been outstanding, and they've put themselves in a position right now where you can't just mess around. Like, they've got to ride Gus, and we might see Marc-Andre Fleury with 2 games maybe in his rest of his career. I mean, honestly, the back-to-back Calgary, Vancouver, and I would assume the season finale if the Wild are locked. But from there, I don't know. They have no back-to-backs other than that one. And I just don't know, unless they just reel off some points here and put themselves in a solid position, how you can mess around with Gustafsson.
Yeah, I agree. And they showed it on the last homestand when Fleury got the first one against Pittsburgh, and then Gus with the every other day games without travel. And that's kind of what we have on this schedule coming ahead, where it's every other day with minimal travel, because it's home games against Washington and New Jersey with an off day in between, and then minimal travel on that New York trip where you're essentially playing 3 in the same city. I do know we switch hotels each city, but it's 20-minute bus ride, so it's not like it's a flight somewhere. So, yeah, I think
there's a reason why you guys stay in Jersey now rather than New York. Remember that trip 3 years ago?
Yeah, the bus ride where they had to push the start of the game back.
Yeah, and everybody got in trouble. The league was not happy with the Wild.
My bus made it there on time. It was the other bus that didn't.
Yeah, which, unfortunately had most of the players that found all.
Right.
But that was the one, if people remember, where one bus was facing toward the Holland Tunnel, one bus was facing toward the Lincoln Tunnel. The Lincoln Tunnel bus got there in plenty of time. The Holland Tunnel, there was an accident in there, and essentially the Wild were in gridlock, and finally needed a police escort to figure out a way to get to the rink. And they show up to the rink. None of them do their normal warm-up. There's no sewer ball. They get on the ice for warm-ups, and then they go and win the game. Pretty impressive victory. It was a fun story to write, if I remember correctly. So we talked about Flower. You know what's unbelievable about this season of just beyond belief injuries? How about David Juracek? He doesn't play for the entire time he's up here. He goes down to Iowa, and in his first game, I hear that he ruptures his spleen. I mean, like, you can't even make it up. Like, this season, man, they need to like get a priest or something.
Well, and this was the same day that we were flying to Dallas and found out Jonas Brodin wasn't going to be on the flight. Mm-hmm. So it's all of a sudden we were talking to John Hines about it.
We're like, why is Cameron Crotty coming up?
Right. Well, he was just talking about they kept thinking, like, I know everybody was asking the question, well, why is Jiricek up here and not playing? And at least a part of the thought process was, well, right now we're so thin on the blue line. Last thing we want to do is send him to Iowa and have him end up getting hurt or something down there. That was at least a part of their thought process. With Brodin coming back and playing the game at home, I think they thought, okay, now we've got one more healthy defenseman. We can let him go down to Iowa. And sure enough, goes down there and in the first game gets hurt. Then they find out Brodin can't make the flight. And all of a sudden, now your seventh defenseman is Cameron Crotty.
Yeah, it's truly unreal how this season has gone. Now and then in that game, Declan Chisholm gets hurt.
Right.
So it's blocking a couple Matt Dumba shots that were Howard.
Yeah, that's been the story of the season, and it as soon as one guy comes back, another guy's going on the list. And so even when we got back, we're going to play Vegas the next day on Tuesday, and I was texting with John Hines in the morning just to confirm his lineup for the night. And that's when he told me that, well, Brodin's going to play tonight, but Chisholm is out. And I was like, how many times have we seen this over the course of the year? One guy comes back, and then that night somebody else gets hurt, and you're
and remember this started early in the year. Remember they like Dylan Ferguson, all of a sudden they needed a goalie. They were like, something happened with Fleury and Gus, and they send Dylan Ferguson to San Diego. In the first game there, he gets hurt. Like, it was just, and while Wallstedt was already hurt, and it's just been a really crazy year. Let's take a quick break. Are you having furnace troubles? Well, winter isn't over yet, so don't let the cold take over. Get fast, reliable repairs and keep your home warm and worry-free by going to Aquarius Home Services. Right now, you can save $98 on furnace, plumbing, or electrical repairs from a company you could trust. Stay comfortable as the seasons change. Trust me, go to Aquarius Home Services. How do you do that? Well, visit AquariusHomeservices.com to get your heat back fast. Again, AquariusHomeservices.com. Aquarius, earning the right to be recommended. And don't forget to mention that Russo sent you.
We love supporting local businesses. We love working with local businesses. I started buying stuff at Twill in the Edina Galleria a long time ago. When I started this podcast network, I was really hoping I'd be able to work with Scott Dayton, the founder and owner of Twill, and I was lucky enough to be able to do so. Now my closet is pretty much all Twill stuff. I don't get free stuff. I don't get discounts. I don't ask for discounts. I go there and pay full freight because I want to support a local business also because the stuff is awesome. Just bought a fresh batch. I'm about to go on a vacation with my wife. Everything I'm packing is Twill stuff because it wears well. It's comfortable. It doesn't wrinkle on planes. It doesn't wrinkle in suitcases. It comes out looking good. It wears like iron, and I'm never going to have to replace it. It's just so simple. Everything from casual shoes to dressy shoes to golf stuff to dress stuff to suits. By the way, you get everything tailor fit, which really helps me out. And everything from, gopher stuff to winter stuff to summer stuff. They just have everything. So go to twillandthen.com, sign up for email updates. They won't send you anything unless they have a very specific event they want you to know about. They won't spam you. And go in there and say hello. Tell them we sent you. It's just a pleasant group of knowledgeable people. They are experts at what they do. It's the best men's clothing store in Minnesota. Go check out Twill online and in person in the Edina Galleria.
If you're looking for a refreshing THC drink, well, check out Giggly. It tastes like your favorite cocktail with no aftertaste and just pure, bold flavor. It's made with real fruit juice and all natural ingredients. It's a Minnesota-made gem. You can find it at liquor stores and Quick Trip locations across Minnesota or get it shipped nationwide. Plus, with a new low pricing and low-calorie options, it's the perfect guilt-free sip. Try Giggly today. Back here, Word Seats in the House, Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta, final segment of the show. And
you mentioned Wallstedt. Can I jump in with one of Vinny's thoughts?
Yeah,
because
definitely.
he brought up Wallstedt as one of these. And now I haven't. Somebody else asked me about this a week or so ago, and it struck me because I haven't given this guy a second of thought lately. It's been a long time since I've even checked in on anything that Wallstedt's been doing. But Vinny's thought is like, what's the update on Wallstedt?
Yeah.
Is there concern that he's a bust? If you had to guess, is it still he and Gus next year? And, why is it so difficult to peg goaltenders? Because this guy looked like as sure a thing as there was in terms of goalie prospects.
Well, first of all, he's hurt again. I think this is his fourth injury this season. So that has surely not helped. I don't want to use the word bust yet, but there has to be concern. Like, I don't know how the Wild can just go into next year now and just say it's Gus Wally. I think they've at a minimum got to sign a really good number 3 that could potentially take the number 2 job if it doesn't work with Wallstedt or if he gets hurt, because at this point you got to be worried about whether or not he's dealing with, if he's got chronic injuries. I know they've all been different types of injuries and things like that. So I think the Wallstedt thing is a concern. And the why is it so hard to peg goalies? I don't know. I do think that, as Bill Guerin himself likes to say, the play in front of you sometimes affects the goaltender.
Right.
And Iowa has been a train wreck for 2 years. Like, they've got to figure out a way to make that team better, because it is unacceptable that Iowa has been as bad as they have been, as consistently as they have been. This is not good for anybody. You want guys to learn to win down there and not be in this situation. And they've got really good guys in Hunter Haight and soon next year Riley Height. They've got all these young defensemen down there, and all they do is learn how to lose and lose and lose and lose. And that's got to be addressed after the season. And it probably is going to affect the coaching staff, I would assume.
It may. I don't know about that. And I agree with you in that I think where organizations have success is when guys not only learn to win, but learn to win together, go through some of that together with guys coming up through the system. In terms of the goaltending, I think the play in front of you affects it, but I also think that's why goaltending is hard to peg, because there is no league in the world where you can simulate the speed and the velocity of shots, how fast pucks go side to side, the traffic, you can't simulate that in any other league than the National Hockey League, whether it be the American League, junior leagues, collegiate leagues, anywhere where you're scouting goaltenders. I think it's just really hard that's the one skill that's hard to say that will translate into the NHL, where you can watch a guy skate, you can watch how a puck comes off a guy's stick, and there's still some unpredictability for sure with how a guy's skill set are going to translate when the opponents are faster, bigger, stronger. But I think with goaltending, it's harder to predict that, because you just don't know exactly. Can he push across like that, where right now he pushes across and gets square to a puck? What if that puck is moving a half a second faster? Does he still get there? Does he anticipate it well? And then there's the mental side of it. Every one of them is going to struggle. Maybe you never struggle in juniors. How are you going to handle it the first time you give up a couple bad ones, or your team breaks down in front of you and you give up a few? And I don't know any of these to be a factor for Jesper Wallstedt. But I do think right now, we kept talking about that, by all indications, he's as sure a bet as there is in terms of goalie prospects that we've seen recently. And I don't think the Wild are different from others. I started to think about it. Go around the league, and how many of those guys, how many of the elite goaltenders were drafted and developed by the team that they're still with and have reached elite levels? There aren't very many.
Yeah, Jake Ottinger,
Hellebuck.
Yep.
Most of them, though, have been... They started here.
Darcy Kemper is a good example of that.
Well, look at. I mean, the Capitals right now have the best goaltending in the league a lot of the year.
Yeah.
Thompson and Lindgren both have been bouncing around, and sometimes it just takes you a couple stops. Markstrom became an elite goaltender in his third city. There just aren't very many.
Yeah.
I mean, Igor Shesterkin came up with the Rangers. And he might, but look at Bobrovsky.
Yeah.
He's been.
Let me throw
around.
this at you and Vinny is. Philip Gustafson's going to be going into the last year of his contract. He's only 27, turning 28, I think, in June. Do you extend him July 1? Or do you let this play out a little bit going to next year to see how he is, to keep him hungry? Because remember, last time the Wild gave him some bank, he came in and had a tough year. I think he's a couple years older and much more mature and won't let that happen again. I think he realizes now what he has to do in the offseason to be successful. But do you, based on what the concerns now with Wallstedt and that he might not be your, quote, goalie of the future, do you make sure in a league where it's very tough to get goaltending that you lock up Gus for even 3 more years? I don't know if Gus would take a term that small. I wouldn't if I were him. But would you? I don't know. I think we keep on talking about Kaprizov extension. I would consider on July 1 getting Gus done too.
I'd consider it, and I think Gustafsson has been the most surprising Wild player to me this year. I did not see this season coming for him, and after the way last year went, I had concerns about whether or not you could count on him as being a long-term number one. I think he's answered that this year. I think it's worthy of an extension. I do think that there was a little bit of, we talked about this 3 goalie situation so much last summer that never turned out to be the case.
I still am so confused on how they even thought that would possibly work.
I think
it lasted 2 games into the season because they couldn't afford him.
Right.
I remember in training camp, I'm like, we spelled it out. I'm like, they have the ability to have one injury with one call up before they cannot have 3 goalies.
They had to be healthy.
So confused.
Had to be healthy,
but I think how they ever thought this was possibly going to be even feasible.
But I really think, and it might not have even been a conscious thought, but it had to weigh in or be at least a small part of it, is that by having Wallstedt in that conversation all summer, don't you think that probably lit a little fire under Gustafsson?
Yeah.
Where it's,
100%.
Hey, all of us. And so that might have been.
And he knew they were looking to, they were talking to other teams.
So
and
that goes back to your question about the extension for the summer, is if he starts to feel like now there is not that pressure, Fleury's gone, it's just me and Wallstedt now, and I think I'm the guy. I don't know how that affects him. That's yet to be seen. You never know how a guy is going to handle success, comfort, security, all that kind of stuff. All indications this year are that he's more mature and has really handled the challenge. I look at the way they leaned on him during that last 6 games of a critical homestand, and he was terrific. Went 4-1-1 over that stretch that may have saved the Wild season.
Yeah.
And that's an indication of a guy who is stronger mentally, ready to handle that kind of challenge. So the answer to your question is yes, I would definitely be considering an extension. I don't know how the rest of it fits. The rest of it plays out.
Yeah,
I mean,
goalies right now. They're getting $5-6 million on his type of player.
And I think the Wild have to sign some kind of a veteran, maybe tail end of his career type guy that maybe is a $1 million or $2 million guy that you could have be your number 3. There's got to be somebody else with NHL experience in the mix.
Philip Gustafsson's agent is Zeev Buium's agent. Maybe you can do a little deal here. All right, we're going to lower the you can't do this, but lower the incentive bonuses on this guy, and we'll take a little haircut on Gus. And actually, Kurt Overhart's the news right now is he's actually selling his business to Wasserman. So we'll see who Gustafsson's agent is this summer. All right, let's go to some X questions. Anthony, Jimmy from St. Louis goes, curious as the club's thought on David Jiricek. We drafted Adam Jiricek this past year, meaning the Blues. Obviously, he was injured at that time, and he's been on and off. Do they lack toughness? I mean, regardless of the injuries and all that type of stuff, I can't speak to Adam Jiricek, and I definitely don't think David Jiricek lacks, quote, toughness. But I will say the one thing that talking to Bill Guerin a lot this season and a little bit during the GM's meetings down in Florida about David Jiricek is that this summer, and now obviously he's going to be dealing with some sort of rehab here from his injury, they want him pretty much to spend 6 to 8 weeks here starting maybe around mid-July. And it's not so much there was so much talk about his skating when he got here. It's not so much to actually the skating that they are concerned about with him. They actually think it's overblown and that a little help with Andy Ness will obviously help. But they want him to get in the gym with Matt Harder and the strength and conditioning crew here because they just, he's a 6'6" guy that just hasn't grown into his body yet. And they just want him to really get into a workout regimen with Matt Harder and come into next year a lot stronger. And I think they're going to give him every opportunity to make the team next year. You and I were talking about, where is David Jiricek going to be in the lineup next year when you give up a first, second, third, and fourth and Damon Hunt for him? And I think you got to come into next year and just say that Zach Bogosian is your number 7 and Jiricek is going to play. Because, again, you got Brock Faber. I still don't, there's a lot of talk because all of a sudden Spurgeon theoretically can be moved because there's no move it has become a no trade, but he has been so good. Have you used his numbers this year? I don't think you even can risk moving.
No, I wouldn't either. Yeah. But because I still also believe if this team's going to go anywhere, it's going to be on the strength of their top 4 defensemen. And that's still the backbone of this club. And I don't think you just hand Jiricek a job on the third pair and say, Zach Bogosian's our number 7. He's got to come in and outplay Bogosian. But if he doesn't outplay Bogosian, then he doesn't belong in your top 6 anyway. Mm-hmm. And I think Zach has been tremendously valuable for this team. I think he'd be better as these years go on if he was playing a little bit less. Maybe not even an every night guy, where if you have 7 or 8 defensemen that can play, that you rotate some of those guys. We've seen a lot of teams do that with success to help keep guys fresh and healthy, especially veteran guys. There are going to be nights where Bogosian's game is going to be more suited to who you're playing against than David Jiricek.
Another fascinating one that I'm wondering about this summer is Declan Chisholm, because, again, he's Group 2. You know, you QO him. How much is he going to want to be paid? And, again, if you just assume, you know, Middleton, Faber, Brodin, Spurgeon, let's just say is Boyum and Jiricek and Bogosian is your 7. If you re-sign Declan, now you can't have, as we've learned this year, with too much depth on the blue line.
Yeah, you probably need 8 defensemen nowadays.
And Boyum, like, to me, there's 2 things. One, Boyum's still got to prove it that he's ready next year. Like, even if they're going to burn the year this year, but, you know, it doesn't mean he's necessarily making the team right out of camp. And the other thing is that with Brodin, look, like, I know it sounds like I'm always taking shots when I call him oft injured, but at this point, you cannot go into a season, if you're Wild management, assuming he's playing 82 games when he's missing on average 25 to 30 a year. So Chisholm has turned into be a handy player. He's a guy that, with Johnny Merrill, they don't want to put him on the third pair, but how often? I mean, he's probably played 40 games this season playing, you know, in the top 4.
Yeah, and I think I have no idea how it works and how it fits, but I think the team would love to go into next season with Bogosian and Chisholm both in the fold and have them both be a part of an 8-man defensive group that will all, at some point, somehow, some way, they're all going to be in the lineup. All those guys are probably going to get 40, 50 games minimum. I mean, just look at this season and the way it's gone. And
who would have thought Devin Shore would play as many games as he has? And Alex Ovechkin tonight, 6 goals away from breaking Wayne Gretzky's record. You know, the hope by a lot of people, especially if you bet, is that he's going to do it this year, because people have, you know, that's a prop bet in Vegas that I've heard a lot of people have thrown money on. 6 goals away. He's scored 20 goals and 38 points in 24 games, I believe, all time against the Wild. And it's going to just be exciting to see this traveling circus. We're getting him in a little bit over at XL Energy Center. He's available to the media. But the one thing about him at his age, it's just he's found the fountain of youth. Come back from a broken leg this year, and he is. It's just a matter of when. Not if.
36 goals in 55 games so far this year. It's just unbelievable. He's shooting at the highest percentage he's ever shot. 17% of his shots are going in. It's unreal. Yeah. And as I've said before, to me, the most impressive part about this season for him is he's doing it within the scope of a team that's had an unbelievable year. This isn't a guy piling up meaningless and no goal is meaningless, but meaningless goals for a team that's 8th, 9th in the East, this is a guy leading a team to the top of the conference right now. They wouldn't be anywhere close without him. And so he's doing it in high pressure situations. And I just don't see, like, how in the world would you bet against him right now?
How about some of the moves that they've made? I mean, obviously their goaltending has been excellent. Jacob Chychrun comes in, gets $9 million a year on an 8-year extension. Has had an unbelievable year. Duham's played great. Strom's been unreal there.
You know, Strome to me is the guy that we were talking about this the other night, because he was part of the same draft as Jack Eichel and Noah Hanifin, and that was the McDavid draft. For a long time, everybody looked at that draft and said Dylan Strome was like one of the biggest misses ever, because he was taken 3rd in that draft. Yeah. But if you look at his career, like, maybe he's a guy like we were just talking about goaltending, where he was in Arizona, went to Chicago. I remember the Blackhawks guys. I remember Pat Foley one time just telling me, like, look, the guy's not a bad player. He's just always going to be judged as the guy drafted right after McDavid and Eichel. It's not his fault that he was taken 3rd. Just let him be a decent player. Well, now he's gone to Washington, and in the 3 years in Washington, 65, 67, 68 points. I mean, this isn't just a guy that came out of nowhere this year. He was the 3rd overall pick. maybe the pressure is finally gone of being the guy that got drafted after McDavid and Eichel, where I bet maybe in Washington fans don't even know. They're like, look, he's just a really good player for us.
Right.
We don't have to deal with the fact that who in the world drafted this guy third overall, and now he's settled in. He's been great.
Yeah, great dude too. A couple years ago, before the All-Star game in Florida, I went down to Atlantis in the Bahamas to just have a little vacation before I flew to Florida for the All-Star game, and he was on vacation with his family and Alex DeBrincat. And what a great dude, like as nice as can be.
And we've already established that when you're assigning free agent value to guys, it's whether or not they've talked to you.
You got to be good in the room. You got to be good in the room,
right.
And I learned that
makes them worth it.
That's the thing, is that I get the
so
initial.
If a guy's happy on vacation, willing to talk to a writer
who
next
is the
to
big
him,
who is the big trade that I made this year in the Donkey League that's gotten me into the championship?
I don't know.
Dylan Strome.
Was it really?
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say.
Just sent him to me in a huge package. I got Kochetkov, Evan Bouchard. Remember, everybody was making fun, and Brock Besser in that deal. Everybody was making fun of me. And who's in the championship years? Give it up, by the way. All you do is make fun of me in this Donkey League on this podcast for years. Who's in the championship right now?
You are. And
exactly.
I don't make fun of you.
No,
you made it to the finals once before. You just got run over by the Burgundy Panthers.
Yeah. So anyway, this is a big
good luck
weeks,
to you.
Yeah.
I know this is big. I
got a Jack Eichel hat trick the other night.
Yep. You've had a good year. The Scribes are facing the hockey guys in the Donkey League Championship Series.
What the big trade was that got me into the final, or got me into the championship, was last second. Sully, who's in our league, calls me up. I'm driving back from a morning skate. He goes, "Hey, I think you should get Freddie Anderson because you have Kochetkov, and there's no guarantee that he's going to be the number one down the stretch." And then I start thinking, I'm like, Freddie's coming back, and I don't know if they're going to trade for a goalie, so it'd be nice to have Freddie. So the last second before on our trade deadline day, I add Freddie Anderson, and Anderson's starts last week is what got me to the final, because they've been on this straight rotation in Carolina. So like this week I'm using Kochetkov, next week I'll use Anderson, that type of thing. All right. Speaking of Eichel, somebody asked, in hindsight, it's always 2020. This is Connor. But would you go back and do the Jack Eichel trade? He has been elite number one center. We've been searching for, it feels like, without knowing, obviously, what was being talked about and who would be going there, 100%. Like, but you don't know. Yeah, like if it was Eriksson Ek, and Boldy or something. Like, obviously, it's hard to say this without knowing what was being talked about between Kevin Adams and Bill Guerin. But in hindsight, not knowing that, obviously, Eichel is he's a Hart Trophy candidate this year.
It's unbelievable how much better he is a player. And I don't know what the actual trade talks were. And so I always, to me, and we've talked about this, I'll never second guess a trade unless I second guessed it at the moment. And there were two that came to mind for me recently. One was, you remember a few years back, and I don't know how tangible the report or how accurate the reporting was. I'm assuming that, for sure it was rigid, because I think you were the one who told me about it, that there was a deal between the Wild and the Maple Leafs for Matt Dumba going one way and William Nylander coming the other. And at that time I said I would do that deal in a heartbeat. The Eichel one, I remember there were some rumors about a trade, and I remember Wes Walls coming to me one day and saying, would you trade, and I think it was Jonas Brodin and maybe a 1 or something. And at that time I said, no, I wouldn't do that. And in hindsight, it would have been a no-brainer to make that, if that was what the trade, and I don't know if Wes knew or if he was just throwing out, like, what if it was this? I would have been wrong on Eichel, because in Buffalo, I never saw a 200-foot player. I saw a guy that could score, but a guy that looked disinterested in some of the little aspects of the team game, that watching him the other night when Vegas was here, he dominated the game. He dominated almost every shift he was on the ice.
He's also like sulky, he is so good.
But that was never the player we saw in Buffalo. He's a plus 30 something this year. He's a minus player for his career, even with the plus 30 this year. And it's just different. He was a plus 25
people
his first
escape
year
Buffalo
in Vegas.
And they become players. Sam Reinhart.
I think there's something to that.
Like Sam Reinhart defensively, he's one of the best shorthanded players in the NHL. Ryan O'Reilly, we know. Victor Olofsson's been great in Vegas this year defensively. We know Marcus Foligno is one of the best defensive forwards in the league. There's just something about the water in Buffalo. Maybe it's Niagara Falls.
Maybe, I don't know.
That just doesn't allow you to.
I would have been wrong on whatever the offer would have been for Eichel. I would have thought it was too much.
Yeah.
Whatever.
If I remember writing at one point like a breaking tweet that the Wild were out on Jack Eichel. It was in the middle of that summer, and I think the Wild they got I think they were trying, and I think they just got frustrated with either the counters or everything that was going on with Kevin Adams at that time. They would have also, like Vegas, allowed him to do the surgery that he wanted, the fusion on the back of his neck. And anyway, if before the Four Nations, I wrote a huge Jack Eichel piece. Really got to enjoy chatting with him for a while for that story as well. And the other thing that Marcus Foligno and multiple players have told me for multiple years is all the stuff in Buffalo about how he was like this bad guy and all that stuff was so ridiculously overblown. He was given, at a very young age, the captaincy. I think the losses weighed on him, like it's weighing on Rasmus Dahlin now and Alex Tuch now and all those guys there. And I just think it, sometimes you just got to get out of there. Do you know that it's like 10 years ago that the Embrace the Tank started in Buffalo? It's like 10 years exactly that the Embrace the Tank started in Buffalo with the fans. And here they are. And they're still
waiting to snap a playoff drought that's the longest in the league.
Yep. I know that we didn't get to a lot of Twitter questions. Let's have the one final one. Wouldn't it be better to have Dur and Duhaime instead of Yakov Trenin? I'll leave that one with you.
Well,
I'd say Duhaime.
Maybe, but it's not really an apples to apples thing. They did get a couple draft picks in those deals that sent those guys away. We got to wait to see. You mentioned it last week, what Barry Trotz had told you about Yakov Trenin, that you got to wait to evaluate him in the playoffs, that he's a guy that might help more in the playoffs than in the regular season. And, those two guys, I just think they have a limited upside. And I mean, yes, right now, would you take those two guys? Well, you would, because you're missing so many forwards that would they be better in your lineup than the guys that are playing on the fourth line? I don't know, maybe, but not by a wide margin. And
but they would be way cheaper, and the team would be faster, and I think more physical. I just think the Trenin signing has obviously not worked out. It's 4 times, 4 at 14. I don't know. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Good news that Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek are on the ice. That is great news. We'll see how far they are from coming back. I wouldn't expect a lot of clarity today from John Hines. Obviously, everything is up in the air. They got to see how these guys are feeling. I do think we're going to see Marcus Foligno back tonight. Thanks for joining us from the Aquarius Home Services studio. Again, April 7th is our next live show at 7 p.m. at Tuttle's. Hope to see you there. Thanks to our sponsors, Aquarius Home Services, your local authorized dealer for Connecticut water treatment systems, Clamshell Beach Resorts, Feller's Ranch, Twill in the Edina Galleria, Giggly THC Beverages, Onyx Map, and Royal Credit Union. Talk to you next week, everybody. So much coming out, there's nothing going in. I know that you feel like you're never gonna win. Oh, but the world won't forgive.